Shavua Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Pesachim. We are up to Perek Hey Mishnah Gimel. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbai ben Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. This Mishnah discusses other intentions that invalidate a Pesach offering. In order to fulfill the mitzvah of a Pesach offering, a person has to, so to speak, register for a specific Pesach offering before it is slaughtered. He does this by joining a group that brings a Pesach and eats it together. Such a group is known as a Chabura. Only people who registered for that specific offering may eat from it. This Mishnah teaches the law for a Pesach that was slaughtered with the intention that it be for people who have not registered for it or for people who otherwise cannot eat it. The Mishnah begins, Shechato shelo leochlav, if he slaughtered a Pesach with the intention that it be for those who are not able to eat it, for example, people too sick or weak to eat it. Now he had in mind that the offering should be for the members of the group who registered for it. However, they all are too sick, too elderly, or too weak to eat a piece of meat the size of a kazait, which is the minimum amount required to fulfill the mitzvah of eating the Pesach offering, v'shelo limnuyav, or for those not registered for it, meaning he had in mind that the offering should be for a different group than the one registered for it, la'arelim v'latmeim, or for uncircumcised people or tameh people who are not allowed to eat a Pesach. Now we know the Torah forbids an uncircumcised Jew to eat from a Pesach offering in Seder Shemot chapter 12, pasuk 48. The Torah also forbids a person who is tameh, impure, to eat from any offering in Sefer Vayikra chapter 7, pasuk 20. Therefore, slaughtering the Pesach for such people is the same as slaughtering it for those who are not able to eat it, as Tosfot writes on page 61a in Masechet Pesachim. The Mishnah says, Pasul, the Pesach is invalid. Now the Torah says, he and his neighbor who is near his house shall take according to the number of people. Everyone according to what he eats shall be counted for the lamb or kid. They shall slaughter it. Psukim and Sefer Shemot, chapter 12, Psukim 4 through 6. The Chachamim, the sages, learned from these phrases that the Pesach must be slaughtered for people who A, were numbered, they were registered for it before its slaughter, and B, are able to eat it. Now this Mishnah speaks just of slaughtering the Pesach for those who are physically not able to eat it, because this intention invalidates the offering only during the slaughter. However, the intention that it be for unregistered people invalidates the offering even if the Kohen has that intention during any of the 4 services that make up the blood service, like we spoke about in the previous Mishnah. Right, so slaughtering the Pesach for those who are physically not able to eat it, that's the invalidation only during slaughter. But for unregistered people, that's invalidated if he has that intention during any of the 4 services. Leochlav v'shelo leochlav. However, if he slaughtered it for those who are able to eat it and for those who are not able to eat it, so for example, a group consisting of healthy people and sick people, limnuyav v'shelo limnuyav, for those registered for it and those not registered for it, limulim v'la'arelim, for circumcised people and uncircumcised people, litmeim v'litorim, or for tameh people and tal people, kasher, it is valid. As long as it is slaughtered for those registered and able to eat it, it is valid, even if it's slaughtered for disqualified people as well. And the Rav explains the reason a dual intention is acceptable in the cases of our Mishnah, but not in the cases of the previous Mishnah, is that the improper intentions of yesterday's Mishnah relate to the offering itself. The Pesach was not offered for the sake of the correct offering. This is treated more strictly. However, in our Mishnah, the disqualification relates to something outside the actual offering, namely the people who will eat it. This pisul, this invalidation, is less serious and invalidates the offering only if it was intended solely for the wrong people. Now we learned in Mishnah 1 that the Pesach was brought on the afternoon of Erev Pesach, after the afternoon Tamid. The Mishnah discusses the law of a Pesach that was brought too early that day. Shechato kodem chatzot pasul. If he slaughtered it before noon, it is not valid. Mishum shenema, because the pasuk says in Sefer Shemot chapter 12 pasuk 6, ben arbaim, the congregation shall slaughter it in the afternoon. Shechato kodem tamid kasher. If he slaughtered it afternoon, but before the afternoon tamid, it is valid. Ubilvad sheyeh echad memares bedamo ad sheyizrek dam tamid, except that someone should continue to stir the blood of the Pesach until the blood of the Tamid is thrown on the altar, and only then throw the blood of the Pesach on the altar. Meaning, ideally, all the services of the Tamid should be done before those of the Pesach. Therefore, even when the Pesach was incorrectly slaughtered before the Tamid, we should still try at least to do the service of throwing the blood of the Tamid before that of the Pesach. In this case, while waiting for the blood of the Tamid to be thrown, the blood of the Pesach must be stirred so that it does not congeal and become unfit to be thrown on the altar. V'im nizrak kasher. However, if the blood of the Pesach was thrown on the altar before that of the Tamid, the Pesach is nevertheless valid. And that is the end of Mishnah Gimel. Mishnah Dal now continues. The Torah commands in Sefer Shemot, chapter 34, pasuk 25, Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. You shall not slaughter the blood of my offering upon leavened food. Now this forbids a person to slaughter the Pesach offering while there is chametz in his possession or in the possession of anyone in the group bringing that Pesach offering. We learned earlier in chapter 1, Mishnah 4, that a person is required to remove all chametz from his possession in the morning of Erev Pesach. In addition, there is a separate prohibition to slaughter the Pesach offering while still in possession of chametz. Now, this prohibition applies even if the chametz is not actually with him in the temple when he slaughters the offering. And the phrase, you shall not slaughter the blood of my offering, should be understood to mean, you shall not slaughter or throw the blood of my offering. Now, this Mishnah cites a dispute in Machloket about the details of this isur, this prohibition. Hashochet et ha-pesach ale chametz over belo ta'aseh. One who slaughters the Pesach while there is chametz in his possession or in the possession of anyone in the group bringing that Pesach transgresses the prohibition of you shall not slaughter the blood of my offering upon leavened food. Now, although the pasuk simply states zivchi, my offering, and does not specify which offering, the pasuk continues velo yalin laboker zeva chag Pesach. Nor may the feast offering of the Pesach festival be left overnight until morning. Since the end of the pasuk discusses the Pesach offering, the sages teach that the unspecified offering, the zivchi, mentioned in the beginning of the pasuk, also refers to the Pesach. And although the slaughter transgresses a prohibition, the Rav does say that the offering is valid. Rabbi Yehuda says, Afa Tamid, one also transgresses this prohibition by slaughtering the afternoon Tamid of Erev Pesach while possessing chametz. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the fact that the pasuk refers to the Pesach by the general term zivchi, my offering, teaches that it includes another offering that is described in a similar manner. This is the Tamid, which is called in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 28, pasuk 2, Korbani lachmi, my offering, my food. And the Rav does tell us, Ven Rabbi Yehuda, the Halacha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Now the next Tana holds that a person can be liable for slaughtering a Pesach while possessing chametz only if the chametz that only if the Pesach that he slaughters is a valid offering. Rabbi Shimon says, a Pesach ב-14 lishmo chayav. If a person slaughters the Pesach on the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach, for its own sake, while possessing chametz, he is liable for transgressing this isur, this prohibition. V'shelo lishmo patur. But if he slaughters it not for its own sake, he is not liable, since slaughtering a Pesach for the sake of a different type of offering makes the Pesach invalid, like we learned in this chapter, Mishnah 2. Rabbi Shimon does not consider this to be to legally be an act of slaughter, and therefore a person who does so does not transgress the prohibition to slaughter a Pesach while possessing chametz. And the Rav explains, according to Rabbi Shimon, only an act of slaughter that makes the meat of the animal fit to eat is considered an act of slaughter under the laws of the Torah. Since the meat of an invalid offering may not be eaten, its slaughter is not considered an act of shchita, what we call shchita shena riyuah lo shma shchita. And therefore he says you would not violate this prohibition. Now, Rabbi Shimon discusses the law for other types of offerings once slaughtered on Erev Pesach while possessing chametz, and the commentators explain, Rabbi Shimon learns from another pasuk that during the time when chametz is prohibited, it is forbidden to slaughter any offering while possessing chametz. However, Erev Pesach is an exception to this rule, as he now teaches. Ush'ar kol hazevachim ben lishman uben shel lishman patur. However, in regard to all other offerings that a person slaughters in the afternoon of Erev Pesach while possessing chametz, whether he slaughters them for their own sake or not for their own sake, he is exempt. Because on Erev Pesach, the prohibition to slaughter while having chametz in one's possession applies only to the Pesach offering. And the Rav explains, in addition to the pasuk that we cited earlier, the Torah repeats the prohibition in Sefer Shemot chapter 23 pasuk 18, Lo tizbach al chametz dam zivchi, you shall not offer the blood of my offering upon leavened food. That verse makes no mention of the Pesach at all, and Rabbi Shimon therefore holds that it includes all offerings. He also learns from the fact that the Torah states two psukim, one that specifies the Pesach in chapter 34, pasuk 25 in Sefer Shemot, and another that does not in chapter 23, pasuk 18 in Sefer Shemot, that the two psukim do not describe identical prohibitions. The pasuk that mentions the Pesach in chapter 34, pasuk 25, that applies during the time that the Pesach is slaughtered, Erev Pesach in the afternoon, and that prohibition applies only to the Pesach. The verse that does not mention the Pesach in chapter 23, pasuk 18, applies when it's no longer the time for slaughtering the Pesach, but chametz is still forbidden, meaning throughout the holiday of Pesach, that prohibition applies to all offerings, like the Mishnah will continue to explain. Now, according to Rabbi Shimon, the opposite is true during Pesach, meaning according to Rabbi Shimon, the prohibition against slaughtering while in the possession of chametz applies on Erev Pesach only to a Pesach offering, and only if it's slaughtered for its own sake. It does not apply to other offerings at all. Rabbi Shimon now teaches that the opposite is true during Pesach, meaning the prohibition applies to all offerings and to a Pesach only if it was slaughtered to be a different offering and not for its own sake. Uba Moed lishmo patur. And during the holiday of Pesach, if a person with chametz in his possession slaughters a Pesach for its own sake, for the sake of a Pesach, he is exempt from this issur, meaning he has not transgressed the prohibition of slaughtering while owning chametz. He is, however, guilty of owning chametz on Pesach. Why? Because it's not a valid offering. We know a Pesach offering can be made only on Erev Pesach to be eaten that night. If it's made at any other time, it is invalid. Shelo lishmo chayav. However, if he slaughters it during the festival, not for its own sake, but for the sake of a shalamim, he is liable, because in that case, it is a valid shalamim offering. And the Rav explains, a Pesach that was not offered on Erev Pesach can be brought later as an ordinary shalamim offering. The Gemara says on page 70b, however, it is valid as a shalamim only if it's not offered with the intention that it be a Pesach. It doesn't have to be offered specifically as a shalamim. An intention for anything other than a Pesach makes it a korban shalamim. Ushal kol hazevachim ben nishman ben shel nishman chayav. And for all other offerings that a person slaughters on Pesach while possessing chametz, whether he slaughters them for their own sake or not for their own sake, he is liable for transgressing this prohibition, because all their offerings are valid, even if they are done not for their own sake, chutz min hachatat sheshachat shel lishma, except for a sin offering that was slaughtered not for its own sake, which is invalid. Now, although all offerings must be made for their own sake, only the Pesach and the sin offering are completely invalid if made for the sake of different offerings. Therefore, one is not liable for slaughtering a sin offering in such a manner during Pesach while possessing chametz. In summary, it was a long Mishnah, a lot of concepts we're not used to. In summary, the Art School Seder writes in note 13, the Tana Kama holds that the prohibition of slaughtering and offering while in the possession of chametz applies only to the Pesach offering. Rabbi Yehuda holds that it applies both to the Pesach and to the afternoon Tamid offering of Erev Pesach. Rabbi Shimon makes 3 points. A person is liable for transgressing this prohibition only if the offering he slaughters is valid. B, the prohibition applies to all offerings during Pesach. And C, on Erev Pesach, it applies only to the Pesach offering. And that is it, Rabotai, today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Shavua Tov. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.